It was nearly midnight on a bitterly cold night when I finally left the campus library after staying late to cram for finals. I zipped my jacket up tight against the icy wind as I hurried to the bus stop, hoping I hadn't just missed the last bus back to my dorm for the night. When I arrived at the bus shelter, I was taken aback to find it completely deserted. Usually, there were at least a handful of other students waiting to catch the late-night bus with me. I checked the bus schedule posted on the wall just to be sure, and saw that there was still a bus due to arrive in 5 minutes. Relieved, I sat down on the metal bench to wait, my breath visible in the chilled air. As the minutes ticked by, I realized how strangely quiet the whole campus seemed. The entire area was deserted, without even campus security vehicles passing by on their nightly patrols. A creeping sense of unease began to set in as I sat there alone. Just as I was contemplating giving up on the bus and calling an Uber instead, 2 bright headlights rounded the corner and the bus pulled up to the curb. When the doors rattled open, I hesitated before stepping onto the bus. The interior was almost completely empty, with only a handful of people sitting far apart in the shadowy seats. Eerily, they were all sitting motionless and completely silent, staring blankly ahead at nothing. As I walked down the aisle looking for a place to sit, an ominous chill went down my spine. There was something unnatural about the empty bus and these creepy passengers. Reaching the middle of the bus, the driver abruptly pulled away from the curb before I could sit down. I stumbled and had to grab an empty seat to keep from falling over entirely. Righting myself, I looked toward the driver seeking some acknowledgement or apology, but could not make out any features in the shadows up front. He had not said a word to me when I boarded, which was highly unusual. It wasn't long before I realized the bus was not taking the usual route back to my dorm. In fact, we were heading off campus into a part of the city I didn't recognize. A knot of dread began forming in my stomach. Where exactly was this bus taking me, and why wasn't the driver following the normal route? Uneasy, I approached the front and quietly asked the driver where we were headed. He didn't respond, or even turn his head to look at me. Speaking up louder, I firmly asked again where this bus was going. The driver's gravelly voice finally rasped back at me. "There's no getting off this ride. Now go take your seat." A chill ran down my spine at his menacing words. I insisted that he stop the bus immediately and let me off. The driver slammed the brakes suddenly, making me lurch forward. As I regained my footing, he hit the gas and the bus surged forward at high speed. I struggled to make my way back down the aisle without falling. The other passengers remained motionless, oblivious to what was happening. My heart pounded as I realized I was trapped on this bus with a deranged driver. I had to get off somehow. Looking down the aisle behind me, I spotted the emergency exit door and hatch. If I could break the glass, maybe I could jump off safely once the bus slowed down. Just then, all of the other passengers simultaneously turned their heads to stare at me. Their eyes were pitch black and soulless. In creepily flat unison, they began whispering to me to sit down, relax.onus. Their voices overlapped in a bizarre, horrific mantra. Every instinct told me not to become one of these freakish passengers. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, I knew I had to escape. I ran to the emergency exit, grabbed the safety hammer, and smashed the glass as hard as I could. As broken glass rained down, the passengers let out an awful wailing cry in protest, but remained seated. Just as I started to hoist myself out the jagged opening, the bus swerved violently, and I was thrown backwards down the aisle. Bruised and bleeding, I forced myself up from the floor. The bus was now barreling recklessly down a pitch-black dirt road that looked like it led to the middle of nowhere. Terrified, I made my way back to the broken exit, timing my next move. Just as the bus swerved again, I used my remaining strength to pull myself through the narrow opening up to my waist. Hitting the road hard, I tumbled and rolled to a painful stop as the red glow of the receding taillights disappeared into the darkness. Dizzy and gasping for air, I limped along the remote dirt road until finally reaching the highway, where I frantically waved down a passing truck. The kindly older driver graciously gave me a ride back to campus. I vowed never again to ride the bus alone late at night, grateful to have escaped that bizarre ordeal with my life. I was in a rush as I hurried through the massive, crowded bus station, weaving between hordes of travelers. In my haste to make my bus, I didn't take the time to double-check the platform number. Seeing a bus pulling up with its doors open, I quickly boarded, relieved that I hadn't missed my ride. I found an empty seat near the back and collapsed into it, trying to catch my breath. As the bus pulled away from the station, I began to feel a vague sense that something wasn't right. We passed by the usual shops and restaurants I was accustomed to seeing on my normal route. But soon the scenery changed to an industrial area that I didn't recognize, full of vacant warehouses and crumbling factories. The bus rumbled through the bleak landscape, heading towards an unknown destination. I glanced around at the other passengers, surprised to see they were completely silent. Instead of the normal chatter you would expect on a bus, they simply stared straight ahead with blank expressions. When I tried to make eye contact with the elderly woman across the aisle from me, she averted her gaze quickly. Their strange robotic behavior made me uneasy. The further we drove into desolation, the more ominous the bus became. We passed by entire city blocks that were boarded up and covered in graffiti. I saw no other cars or signs of life on the trash-strewn streets. It was like driving through a ghost town. My sense of foreboding grew as the bus trundled on through this urban wasteland. I stood and walked up the swaying aisle to the front, hoping to ask the driver how much longer until we arrived at my stop. But as I approached him, he refused to acknowledge me at all. His eyes remained fixed on the road, jaw clenched tight, knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I asked where we were headed, he simply ignored me as if I wasn't there. My heart began to pound rapidly in my chest. I realized I had boarded the wrong bus, some kind of rogue vehicle with a driver who clearly had sinister intentions. I turned quickly and marched back to my seat, planning to pull the cord to signal my stop. But my blood ran cold when I saw there were no cords installed above the seats. No way for a passenger to request a stop. We were trapped inside this ominous vehicle. In a panic now, I rushed to the front and grabbed the doors, trying to pry them open. But they were electronically locked, firmly shut. The bus was a prison I could not escape. Spinning around, I considered pleading with the other passengers to help me get off this nightmare ride. But they remained eerily unaffected, making no movements or cries of alarm. It slowly dawned on me that this bus must be used to illegally transport contraband or worse. The other passengers were unwilling participants, too terrified and defeated to react or try to escape. My intestines twisted with fear as I realized I was now trapped with them, being taken to some unknown but undoubtedly dangerous final destination. I racked my brain trying to come up with some way out of this mess. In my rush that morning, I had left my cell phone at home, so I had no way to call for help. The windows only cracked slightly open, not nearly enough space for a person to squeeze through. I watched with dread as we left the city limits, the tires crunching over increasingly primitive dirt roads as we headed into a heavily wooded area. In desperation, I considered physically rushing the driver and trying to force him to stop. But he was a burly, menacing man, and who knew if he had a weapon hidden nearby? Attacking him could make things exponentially worse, potentially provoking him to violence against me or the other defenseless riders. I had to come up with a smarter plan. As the roads became more rugged and the foliage thicker, an idea came to me. Since we were now in an isolated area with no cell service or power lines, I wondered if I could find a way to make the bus break down. If it were stranded out here, the driver would have no choice but to call for help. When the bus slowed to carefully cross a streaming creek, I saw my chance. As we bounced over a large rock, I quickly reached up and yanked the cord connecting the rear emergency exit. Just as I had hoped, the bus sputtered and shook, the engine cut out completely. We were going nowhere now. The driver cursed loudly, slamming his fists onto the wheel. After trying and failing to restart the engine, he had no choice but to radio for a repair crew. The passengers continued to sit in terrified silence, but I finally breathed a sigh of relief. We were stranded, but that was better than being taken wherever this deranged driver intended. Now he would have to call for help, and I could report the entire incident to the authorities. We just had to wait it out here until real help arrived, all because I had rushed onto the wrong bus. It started off as a typical Tuesday morning for me. I went through my regular routine of getting ready for work, grabbing a quick breakfast, and walking the few blocks to my bus stop. The morning air still had a fall chill as I joined the small crowd waiting to board. Before the bus arrived, I decided to get my usual coffee from the nearby cart. As I stood in line, steaming cups in hand all around, my eyes wandered and landed on a black duffel bag sitting alone on a bench. It struck me as odd that no one seemed to be attending to it. I glanced around, thinking its owner couldn't be far, but no one was paying it any mind. After receiving my coffee, I walked closer to inspect the bag. It was a standard size, black nylon duffel, slouched casually on the bench as commuters rushed by it. There were no distinguishing marks or tags on the outside to signify its owner. It almost blended right in with its surroundings, and I thought perhaps it had been accidentally left behind. But as more minutes passed with no one retrieving it, I started to feel uneasy. In today's world, an unattended bag could signal something dangerous. I looked around again thinking someone would notice and claim it, but the few people sitting on adjacent benches were absorbed in their phones. Why was no one concerned about this bag just sitting there? I decided I should alert the bus station staff just to be safe. I walked over to the information kiosk and got the attendant's attention. I told him about the bag and where it was, and he promptly called security. 2 uniformed guards showed up and I pointed the bag out to them. They surveyed the area for anyone showing interest, then carefully inspected inside the bag. Finding nothing dangerous or noteworthy, they took it away to the lost and found. Relieved it was now in safe hands, I finally boarded my bus without giving that bag another thought. It wasn't until I arrived at work that I got an unsettling feeling something was wrong. I had just sat down at my desk when an anonymous email popped up. "Give it back or else" was all it said. I was confused. Give what back? A few minutes later, I received an ominous text message from a blocked number. "The bag." Don't mess with us. My heart jumped as I made the connection and realized that abandoned bag was what they wanted. But how did they know I was involved? Were they watching me this whole time? More creepy messages started coming through every few minutes. "We know where you live. Your daughter is very cute. You'll regret this." I felt sick. Not only did these unknown people seem to know my personal details, they were also threatening my family. I thought about calling the police, but I had no proof of what was happening. I was paranoid but tried to ignore the messages and focus on my work. Maybe it was just an idle threat and would pass. When I arrived home that evening, everything appeared normal. My husband said nothing unusual had occurred in my absence. I was hesitant to worry him over what was probably just empty threats from some prankster. We ate dinner and watched TV as usual, though I had a nagging fear in the back of my mind. I hardly slept, anxiously waiting to see if the terror would continue come morning. My apprehension spiked walking to the bus stop the next day. Any small sound or movement put me on high alert. My phone chimed and I knew exactly what it meant. "Last warning, the bag," said the latest text message. Then another displayed a photo of my daughter Jane in her soccer uniform as proof they had seen her. In that moment, I realized I had to act. These people knew too much and were still watching. I changed direction and sprinted straight for the police station. Breathless, I told the officers on duty everything that had happened since I found that bag at the bus stop yesterday. 2 policemen accompanied me back there to retrieve it from lost and found, insisting on caution in case this involved dangerous criminals. When we opened the zippered duffel, we were all stunned by the contents. Bricks of heroin, stacks of cash, and a handgun filled the bag. This was no accidentally forgotten luggage. It was key evidence of a major drug crime, likely belonging to an elusive trafficking ring we'd been trying to crack. The seriousness of what I'd stumbled into finally hit me. These were dangerous criminals who thought I took something of theirs, and now knew where I and my family lived. I worked closely with the police over the following weeks to help identify and catch the perpetrators. It was a terrifying ordeal, but in the end we were able to arrest multiple ringleaders and dismantle a sizable drug operation. The whole experience left me feeling exposed and uneasy even after it was over. Knowing I was being watched that closely by nefarious people, and that I unintentionally disrupted their criminal activity, still gives me chills. I'm just relieved my cooperation with the police led to arrests rather than putting my loved ones in harm's way. I will never look at an unattended bag the same way again. A simple act of caution opened my eyes to unthinkable dangers hiding in plain sight.